the user interface, the parts that we see, right, and interact. So that is built using React.js. Whereas when it comes to the Node.js and Express.js are used on the server side or backend. And when it comes to the database, it's MongoDB. Okay. So in React.js, we are going to cover these topics. So starting with introducing the React and JSX, then we'll see about components and props, then lists and keys, then we'll see about state and class components. So then we are going to cover about lifecycle methods, and then routing using the React router, and finally authentication. So these are briefly the list of concepts that we are going to learn in React.js. Okay, so let's start today's session. In today's session, firstly, we'll introduce the React.js. Then there are two important things, creating the element and the rendering part. So we'll see about the react.createElement and react.dom.render. And then we'll understand about JSX, where we are going to see about embedding the expressions and nesting elements. So firstly, let's understand about React.js. So React.js is actually an open source JavaScript library. So open source we know, right? So this library is available publicly, right? So other developers can contribute it and make it even better, right? At the same time, it's a library. That is, it's a reusable resource. Okay, so React.js is actually an open source JavaScript library which is used to build the user interfaces. Okay, to build all the parts that we see, interact, right? That user interface. To build that, we can make use of the React.js library. Okay, so this React.js is actually built by Facebook. So if you see the React in the GitHub, right? So beside the star, you can see the number, right? So 166,000. So here, this indicates that so many people like the React.js. Right, there's a huge community when it comes to React.js, right? So this particular library will be improvised day after day, right? That's one biggest advantage, right? At the same time, so we can actually easily learn React.js and build large applications. We can build large complex applications very easily using the React.js. Okay, so and also the applications that we build using React.js would have really good performance. Okay, so the websites that we build using React.js are really performant. Okay, and also the lines of code that are required to build are less. Okay, so that's developer friendly, right? At the same time, so the readability of the code is improved using React.js. Okay, so as we understood, right, we have to write the code so that the computer will be able to understand. At the same time, the code that we write, so that should be easily readable and understandable by the other. So in case of React.js, so it will improve the readability of the code too, right? And at the same time, the time consumed to develop an application in using React.js is less. So the time for the developer will also reduce. There you can see, right? The number of lines required to write the code is less, and the readability has improved, and the time consumed is less. So it's all developer friendly, right? At the same time, as we understood, it's open source and the code would be reusable. So using the code, we can build multiple functionalities. Okay, so like this, there are various advantages when it comes to React.js. That is the reason top companies use React.js. So there you can see a lot of companies use React.js. There's Facebook, Netflix, Uber, IMDb, Spotify, like this, Instagram, like this. A lot of companies make use of React.js in their applications. So we understood the advantages of React.js, right? Firstly, it's easy to learn and there is large community. And more importantly, right, so there is a developer tool set available, right? So if you take a mechanic, right, so when he has to do something, he needs a tool set, right? Similarly, when it comes to the developers, so even the developers need tool set. Okay, so here the developer tool set will be available with React.js. So like this, there are various advantages of React.js. And even if you observe the download trends, when we compare React with the other similar technologies, right? So the number of downloads is way higher, right? So a lot of developers like React.js and they are working with React.js, right? Okay, so we understood about React.js, which is an open source JavaScript library using which we can develop the user interfaces, right? So we understood why it's so popular, right? And we understood the various advantages of it and the companies that are using and the trend, right? Okay, now let's start learning our React.js. Okay, so firstly, you need to set up the code playground for today's session. So you need to run this command. Okay, with this, the code playground will be set for today's session. So once you do this, so if you observe the files there in the file explorer, so you'll find a file index.html in which we have some HTML code, right? So there, if you observe the code, so you can see that there is some JavaScript code too, right? In between, can you see? So within the script tag, there is a script tag, and within that we have JavaScript code. Okay, so actually we can make use of the script tag to include the JavaScript code. Okay, so let's have a look at that. So here you can see, once you set the code playground for today's session, you will find these files here. Now let's have a look at the index.html file. So here you can see we have the HTML, there's head, and then there's body. So within the body, firstly, we have the div element root. So then after that, we have a script tag. So you can see here, we have a script tag. So using the script tag, actually, we can add the JavaScript code in the HTML file itself. To include the JavaScript code within the HTML, we can make use of the script tag. So we have written script type equal to text/JavaScript. So with this, within the script tag, we can write the JavaScript code. Okay, so here you can see, firstly, we are accessing the root element. Then we are creating a heading element. So this is the heading element. So for this, the text content is hello world. And then next, we are adding some styling to it. So this is the class. So class list.add greeting. And then finally, we are appending it as a child to the root element. Root element is this, right? So we are appending that as a child. Okay, clear? So if you observe, we have written the script and this entire thing below the div element root. Okay, what is the reason, right? The reason is we are actually making use of this root element. So that is the reason we have written the script tag after the script element after this. Okay, so in case if you are making use of any elements within this JavaScript code, so the entire script should be present below these elements. Okay, because the HTML will execute line by line. So here we are trying to access the root element. So this root element should be created before itself. Okay, clear? So we understood that to include the JavaScript code within the HTML file, we can make use of the script tag, and we have to define the type as text/JavaScript. With this, we can write the JavaScript code within this script tag. Okay, clear? So we understood this, right? Another point here is, so if you see, we have element.classList.add greeting. So here basically we are adding a greeting class, right? So this greeting class is actually defined in index.css file. Okay, there you can see. So to combine the CSS and HTML file, we need to include the CSS file in the HTML, right? So for that, within the head tag, so if you expand this, so here you can see we are making use of the link element, right? So here this one. So using the link element, we are including the CSS file into the HTML. Okay, so the CSS file is included in the HTML with this line. Okay, so with this we are able to add classes in this manner. Okay, clear? So we understood that using the script tag, we can add the JavaScript code in the HTML file itself. And also using this link, right, we are able to include the CSS file, and appropriately we can make use of the classes in the CSS file. Okay, clear? So we have seen the index.html file and understood the code in that. So we also have seen about the index.css file. So there, as we understood, if we want to include the JavaScript code within the HTML, we have to make use of the script tag. So using this, we can include the JavaScript in HTML. Here, for the type attribute, we need to set the value as text/JavaScript. With this, basically, the code that we have written inside the script tag will be considered as JavaScript. Only then, HTML will be able to understand that it's a JavaScript code and appropriately will be able to run. So that's the reason we need to specify the type as text/JavaScript. Okay, clear? So we understood these steps, right? So now let's have a look at the preview of this. So for that, so just right click on that file, whichever we want to see. So here we want to view the index.html. So right click on that. So then in the open with, so there's preview option, click on that. So with this, you will be able to see an output in this manner. Okay, let's have a look at this. So here we have the index.html. Now we want to have a preview of it. So right click on it, open with, and then click on preview. So with this, you will be able to get a preview in this manner. So this is what we have done, right? So if you observe the JavaScript code, so here we are creating the heading element and the text content is hello world and some styling, right? So appropriately, we got the result, okay, in this manner. Okay. So we understood this part, right? Okay. So now what we have done is we have made use of the JavaScript code and we have created a heading element in this manner, right? So now let's create the heading element using React.js. Now we'll make use of the React.js and create the heading element. Okay, so to include this React.js library, as we understood, React.js is a library, right? To include that library, we need to add these lines of code, right, within the head element. So within the head element, so you need to add these lines. Okay, so with this, so the React will get included within the HTML. Okay, so then you can keep on adding the React.js code in the HTML. Okay, so here this is called the React CDN. Okay, so now the next thing is, so in the script tag, we'll start writing the React.js code. So here, since we are adding the React.js code, the type should be module, right? So when you define the type as module, so then it will understand that we are the code present within that is React.js. So appropriately, it will run it. Okay. So to define that, we need to write type equal to module. So if it's JavaScript code, you have to write text/JavaScript. Whereas here, we are writing React code, right? So for that, we need to write type equal to module, right? So since we already have imported the React, right? So on the top, so that's the reason we are able to write type equal to module, and appropriately the code that you write within the script tag will be considered as a React.js code and it will run accordingly. Okay, so now let's see how to create an element in React. So in JavaScript, how do we write? So document.createElement of, and we'll specify the tag, right? Similarly, in React, we just write it as react.createElement of, and we'll provide the tag, right? So here we use document.createElement, whereas in case of React, we use react.createElement, okay? And we'll provide the tag there, okay? Which is h1. So here, we can also pass the properties that we want to add to that element as an argument. Okay, properties, by that I mean the attributes that we want to add, like class name, on click, all these we can pass as an argument to the create element itself, right? Generally in the JavaScript, so once we create the element, then we write like dot class list dot add, all these, right? So instead of that, in case of the React, we can directly pass the properties as arguments. That is the HTML attributes that we want as arguments, as an argument to the create element. Okay, firstly, the first argument is the type, that is a tag name. So in case if you want to create a heading, so it will be h1 or p or div, whatever we want to create. So the second argument is the properties for that element, right? So like the class name, ID, on click, like these. Okay, so these are the properties that we want to assign for that element. Okay, so in React, it's popularly known as props. Okay, in React, it's popularly known as props. So we generally say that the props that we need to add will pass as the arguments. Okay, so now let's see an example for that. So here in JavaScript, we want to create an h1 element. There you can see the main heading. And then the text content is hello world, and the class list, we want to add greeting. Okay. So for this, the corresponding React.js code would be, right? So react.createElement. In React.js, we have to write react.createElement of. The first argument is type, which is h1. There you can see. And the second argument is the props that we want to pass, right? That is the properties that we want to assign for that element. So that, there you can see it's like an object. So firstly, we want to pass the class name. So we have written class name. So, and then that is greeting. Okay, clear? So now let's create a variable for the props. So element props, and there you can see these are the props that we want to assign. And the element type is h1. Finally, we are passing that to the create element. With this, our element will get created. So are we done here? No, right? So we are done creating the element, but we have to define the position. We have to specify where exactly this element should come, right? So for that, in JavaScript, what do? We take an element and do dot append child of, and we'll pass the element, right? So in case of React, we'll make use of the React DOM. So in DOM, there's React DOM. So React DOM.render. For this, we'll pass the element and the parent. Okay, with this, appropriately, the element will get rendered. Okay, so this React DOM.render method is used to display the React element. We have created the React element. Next step would be displaying, right? So for that, we'll make use of the React DOM.render method. Okay, so the first argument is what we want to render, right? The element that we have created. So that will pass. And the second argument is where exactly do we want to render, right? So we want to render it within the container. So we have to pass that as the second argument. Okay, so the parent in which we want this React element to be. So that we have to pass as the second argument. Okay, clear? So there you can see React DOM dot render of, and we'll pass the element. And then this has to be as a child to the root element, right? That div root, okay, that container. So we are passing that, okay, document.getElement by ID root. So we just use the document.getElement by ID directly, okay. So with this, appropriately, the React element that we have created will be rendered. That is, it will be displayed. Okay, so here you need to observe while writing. So it should be React DOM, so DOM are capital. So just cross-check the syntax. So with this, we'll get an output in this manner. Okay, so shall we give this a try? Okay. So now, so this is the index.html file, right? So here we already have some JavaScript code, right? Now we want to write React.js code here, right? So let's start doing that. Okay, so firstly, as we understood, so when it comes to the React.js code, right? So we need to import that library, right? So to include that library into the HTML file, so in the resources.md, so if you view the preview of it, okay, so these are already available for you. These are the scripts, okay? We need to add these into the head. Okay, I'm adding them. Clear? So these are the React CDN, right? So by adding these into the head element, so with this, so the React library, we can make use of the React library in this HTML file, okay? So now the next step is writing the code. So we'll write the code within the script tag. So for that, we need to define the type as module. Okay, so the type should be module. So in case of the JavaScript code, it's text/JavaScript, whereas in case of React, it's module. So that's when it will understand that the code that you're writing in the script tag is React.js code, and appropriately it will run. Okay, now the next thing is we want to create it a heading element, right? How do we create? React.create element of, and the first argument is a type of the element that we want to create, so which is h1. Okay, so and then the next argument is props. Let's create some variables for that. Okay, constant element type is h1, so we'll pass that here. And then, so the second argument would be the props. It's an optional argument. So here for the heading element, we want to define some attributes, that is some properties for this element. So let's do that. We generally call that as props. So element props equal to, so which would be an object. So for this, firstly, we want to define the class name. So class name is greetings. So the class name is greeting. And then another one that we want to define is the text content, right? So in case of React, to define the text content, we make use of the children. Okay, so we have to write as children. So children colon, which the content that we want to display is hello world. Okay, simple. So the class name is greeting and the children is hello world. Okay, now let's pass this element props to here. Okay, so with this, the heading element will get created. So let's do that. So we are getting the element. So now creating the element is done. Next thing is we have to display that. So for displaying, we have to make use of the render method. So in the React DOM, so here you observe React with the R capital and then DOM, all these are capitals. Okay, dot render of, and the first argument is the element that we want to render. So that I'm passing. So and the second argument is where we want to render, right? So as we understood, it should be a child for this element, right? So we'll pass that. So to access this element, directly we can do document dot get element by id of, and then the id is root. Okay, with this the React element will get rendered. Okay, so now let's save this and let's have a look at the preview. So there you can see the output, hello world, right? So we got this output. Okay, so we understood about how to create element in React.js, right? So in React.js actually introduced a new HTML-like syntax. It's called the JSX. So just like how we in HTML we create elements, so similarly in JSX we can make use of this HTML syntax and create elements, right? So let's have a look at that. So here we want to create a heading element. So there directly we can write h1 class name equal to greeting, hello world, and the end tag. So with this, the heading element will get created. So here internally what happens is this JSX will be compiled into the JavaScript code that we have written previously. This was the code that we have written previously, right? So this will get compiled into the JavaScript code in this manner. Okay, so for a compilation in this manner, compilation we mean translate. You can consider it as translate. Okay, so this JSX code will be translated into the JavaScript with the help of a compiler. So there are various compilers. The most popular one is Babel. So using this compiler, so the JSX will get translated into the JavaScript code. Okay, we'll be writing in JSX. So using this compiler, we can that will get converted into the JavaScript code, and appropriately we'll be able to see the output. Okay. So for that, we need to include this tag. This is already available for you, that in the head element there you can see in the script, we have to include that. So then when it comes to defining the type, right? So in case of the React.js, we have written type equal to module. But if we are writing the JSX code, so then the type should be text/Babel. So then it will be able to understand that it's a JSX code. So for that, the type would be text/Babel. Okay, clear? So now coming to the JSX code, right? So here directly we'll create the element in this panel. There's no need of all that. So directly h1 class name equal to greeting, hello world, and this. So with this, the element will get created. So then using the React DOM, we can render the element. So directly using the React DOM, we are rendering the element, right? So with this, we'll get an output in this manner. Okay, so let's give this a try. So we have seen about this JavaScript code, right? So here, as we understood, in React.js, there's a new HTML-like syntax called JSX. Now let's write code related to that. Okay. So for that, firstly, this line should be present, right? So here we are including that Babel, which is a JS compiler. So that should be present. So then coming to the type, so the type should be text/Babel. So in case if you're going to write the JSX code, then the type should be text/Babel. Okay. So we understood this. Okay. Now the next thing is writing the JSX code, right? So let's create the element, constant element. So here it's just like the HTML syntax, right? So we just write h1 in this manner. Okay, where the class name, we want it to be greeting. So then the text content is hello world. Okay, and then /h1. Done, right? So it's that simple. Just like how we create the HTML code, it's just that. Okay, so with a slight modification, here we write class name. Okay, so in HTML we write class equal to greeting, right? Whereas in JSX we use class name. Just with simple changes, there'll be very slight modifications, but with that we can write it in this manner. And then using the React DOM, we are rendering the element. Okay, so let's have a look at the preview. So there you can see hello world, right? So we got this output. Okay. So we understood about this, right? Okay. So there you can see, in case of JSX, we use class name. Actually, in HTML, we write class. In case of JSX, it's class name. Just slight changes would be there, but mostly it will be like a HTML syntax. Okay. So now we understood about the JavaScript. So in case of the JavaScript, to create element, we write document.createElement. In case of the React.js, it's react.createElement. In case of the JSX with React, right? So there we just directly write the HTML part. So h1 hello world / h1 in this manner. And when it comes to the rendering, right? In case of JavaScript, we take the element dot append child. Whereas in React.js, we make use of the React DOM. So React DOM.render. And similarly in JSX also we'll use the React DOM. Okay, so we understood these. Now, let's see about embedding the variables and expressions in JSX. Okay, so let's see how to do that. Okay, so right now we have two variables. So there is name equal to Rahul and class name equal to greeting. Now we want to embed these into our JSX code. Okay, so here when it comes to the class name, we want to provide the value present in the class name variable. Okay, so instead of directly writing greeting, so we are storing that in a variable and we want to provide that variable here. Okay, so for that, we have to make use of the curly braces. So within the JSX code, if you want to embed variables or expressions, you have to make use of these curly braces. So within the curly braces, you have to specify the variable or the expression, whichever you want to embed. So here it's class name. So class name equal to, so then within the curly braces, we have written the class name. Whereas when it comes to the text content, so we want to write hello and the value present in the name variable. So then again curly braces and we'll provide the name variable. Okay, so with this, the value stored in the name variable will be appropriately embedded here. Okay, so there you can see the output as hello Rahul. Okay, let's give this a try. So here you can see that we want to embed variables or say expressions, right? So let's see how to do that. So firstly, let's have few variables, say name equal to, I'll have my name, okay, say Pranita. Okay, similarly, let's say the class name, we want to have that. So let's call it greeting. Okay, so now here we want to embed that variables, right? So for that, what do we have to do? We have to make use of these curly braces. And within the curly braces, you have to mention the variable or the expression, whichever you want to embed. So here, what do we want to embed? The class, right? So class name, that's a variable. And coming to this place, so here we want to specify the name. Okay, so curly braces, and within that, we have provided the name variable. So with this, so these variables or the expressions will get embedded. So let me save this and have a look at the preview. So there you can see I have hello Pranita, and appropriately you can change here, right? So here let's say I'm writing hello Ram, and then I'll just save it and let's have a look at the preview, right? So there you can see we got it as hello Ram. Okay, clear? So we have seen this output, right? Okay, so here as we understood, using the curly braces, we can embed variables, expressions. Similarly, here in our case, we have a particular function, okay? And in this function call, we are taking some data, first name and last name, and appropriately, we are creating an expression where we want to say hello, Rahul space Atluri, right? So there you can see how we write, okay? Hello, and within the curly braces, so we'll call the function, right? Full name of, and then we'll pass whatever data that we want to pass. So here it's the user object. So with this, what will happen? So the function will get called. So in that, so they see first name is Rahul's plus, and then there's space, and then plus, and then the last name Atluri. That entire expression will get evaluated, and we'll have the final result as hello Rahul Atluri. So in this way, we can make use of these curly braces and embed variables, expressions, function calls. All this we can embed within the JSX code. Okay, so let's try this out. Okay, so just like how we have embedded variables, we can also embed expressions. Okay, so for that, so let's have a user object. Okay, so in this user object, so the first name, so we want some first name to be present. Okay, so yeah, that's a key for the object. Okay, and the corresponding value, say Pranita. Okay, and then we have the last name too. Okay, so let's see. Okay, in this way, we have provided the user object, right? So the first name and the last name. Now we want to make use of this, right? So let's create a function for that. So what shall we call this? We are getting a full name. So let's say full name. Okay, so here in the full name, what do we want to do? Okay, so from the user object, which we'll pass as argument here. Okay, so we want to access the first name plus, and then plus user dot last name. Okay, so with this, we have created this full name object. Now we want to call this and appropriately display the first name plus last name, that entire thing. So what do we do? So within the curly braces, so we'll call the function full name and plus the data, which is user. Okay, so with this, what will happen? Okay, so the function will get called. So we have the user object and we have Pranita plus space Motori, and with this, we'll get the entire full name. Okay, let's save this. Have a look at the preview. So there you can see I got it as hello Pranita Motori, right? So in this way, you can embed variables, you can embed expressions in the JSX code. This is the JSX code, right? So this entire part. So within that, we can embed variables, expressions, all this within the JSX code. Okay. So we have seen this and we got this output, right? So the next thing that we are going to see is nesting JSX elements. Okay, let's see how to do that. Okay, so let's say we have a heading, we have another paragraph element, and this all entire thing is present in a div element. Okay, so that we are storing in the element variable. So here, when we have this nested JSX elements, we have to enclose this within the parenthesis. Within the parenthesis, we have to enclose this entire HTML JSX code that you have written here. Okay, so there you can see. So then, when it comes to the React DOM.render, we'll pass that element and then appropriately the parent in which it has to be rendered. One point to note is, when it comes to the React DOM.render, it will only render one element. So the element that you pass, so it will only one element it will render. Okay, clear? So there you can see we have div. So the entire thing it will get rendered. That entire div with the children, all this will get rendered. Okay, clear? So there you can see, right? So heading, paragraph, div, that entire part, the HTML code that we want to write. So we have just written it there. I've assigned it as an element and then we are rendering it, right? So in this way, when we have a big application, different parts that we want to add, you can directly write the HTML like syntax here and then we can render it and appropriately it will get created, right? So if you imagine the corresponding the JavaScript code, right? So you have to create the element, then you have to assign the text content for each of these elements, then append it as a child. So there are a lot of things that you have to do, right? But when it comes to using JSX, so it has become very simple. Directly, just like how we write in HTML, we can write it here and we'll be able to easily display that. Okay, clear? So with this, we'll get an output in this manner. So let's try it. So as we understood, now we want to basically have nested JSX elements. So this is just one element, right? H1. Now we want to have nested JSX elements. Let's see how to do that. So in that case, you have to enclose them in the parenthesis, okay, in this manner. So in case of the nested JSX elements, you have to make use of the parenthesis to enclose that nested JSX element. So here basically, we first have div. So within the div element, okay, so we have heading. Okay, and also let's say we have a paragraph element. Okay, say good to see you in this manner. Okay, so this is a nested JSX element, right? There is a div, within the div there is a heading, then there's paragraph, right? So we can in case of this nested JSX elements, we can enclose that within this parenthesis and this will be considered as an element, and with this we are rendering it. Okay, clear? So let's save this and then let's have a look. So there you can see we have this and then there's good to see you, all this. Okay, clear? So in this way, we can have nested JSX elements, but they have to be enclosed within the parentheses, these. Okay. So we have seen this output. Okay. So now we'll also see about how to include the external JS file in HTML, right? So far what do we have done? So in the HTML file, we have written the JS code, right? So using the script tag, so within the HTML itself, we have written the JS code. But actually it's always better to write the JS code in the JS file, right? Because as we go further, right, a lot of code will be adding, right? It's always better to write the JS code in the JS file, right? So let's move the JS code into the index.js file. Okay, let's create index.js file and move the code to that. Okay, so now we have moved it, but we have to combine the HTML and the JS, right? So within the HTML, so we have to combine this JS code. So how do we do that? So for that, we can make use of the script tag. So the type is appropriately. If it's a JavaScript code, we'll write text/JavaScript. If it is JSX code, we'll write text/Babel. If it is React.js code, then we write module. Appropriately, we have to assign the type. Okay, and then we have a source attribute. So src equal to, and we have to provide the path to the JavaScript file. Okay, we have to provide the path to this JS file, right? So if you provide this path, then this entire JavaScript code will get included into the HTML. Okay, you can write the JavaScript separately in a file and you can include that into the HTML by writing this line. Okay, src equal to, and you can provide the path. Okay, so now within the body tag, since we have written the JSX code, the type is text/Babel, and then the src equal to index.js. Here, one point to note. So you need to be conscious about where are you writing the script tag. Okay, so in case if you are making use of the elements, right, of any elements in the HTML file, so you need to define the script tag after that so that they are created. As we understood in the HTML, it will be executed line by line, right? So those elements have to be created so that you can access them in the JS file. So the script tag should be defined after the elements have been created. Okay, clear? So with this, again, you will find an output in this manner. Okay, so shall we try this out? Okay. So here you can see, right, that we have written a lot of JSX code, the JavaScript code here in the HTML file itself, but always it's suggestible to keep it separate in a JS file, right? So let's move it. Okay, let's create a new file. So which is index.js. Okay, so within this, now we are adding the JavaScript code, right? So there you can see, we have written the JavaScript code here. Okay, So now I'm saying this. So now we have to include this JavaScript code into the HTML, right? So how do we do that? So as we understood, we'll make use of the script tag. So the type is this, and then we'll specify the index.js file using the src attribute. So src equal to, and we'll provide the file which is index.js. Okay, so with this index.js will get included into the HTML file, and appropriately we can have a look at the output. Okay, so there you can see we again got the same output, right? So here what we are doing, right? So in the we have separated out the JS code we have present in the index.js file, that we have included in the index.html by writing this line. So with this the code will get included, and appropriately you'll be able to see the output, right? Okay, so we understood this. One point to note is, so you should use either one of these methods. Either write the JavaScript code in the HTML file using the script tag, or move the entire code to a separate file and include it, right? So do not use a combination of this. That is, some part of the code in the JS file, some part of the code you have included in the HTML. You shouldn't do this. Otherwise, it will not work as expected. You might face issues, right? So you'll be expecting some output. You might not get that output. So either use one of these methods. Either write the entire code within the script tag, or within the script tag in the HTML file, or write the code in the JS file and include it in the HTML. Obviously, writing it in a JS file would always be suggestible, because keeping the HTML, CSS and JavaScript separate would make the code more cleaner and more readable, right? Okay, so we are done with today's session. Let me summarize what we understood in today's session. So firstly, we introduced React.js, so which is part of the MERN stack. Okay, then React.js is an open source JavaScript library. So then in that we have seen about how to create an element using react.createElement. Then we have seen how to display it using the React DOM.render, right? So then we also understood that React.js has introduced a new HTML-like syntax, which is JSX, right? So then we'll be just writing similar to the HTML code, and then we'll be able to create the elements using that.